Jesse James, one of America's most famous outlaws of the Wild West. Knights Templar treasure, which is a treasure hidden from King Philip and was lost. But there is an argument that the Knights Templar may have found it, and today we have author and the great-great-grandson of Jesse James, Daniel Duke, that investigated into the lost treasure, possibly connecting Jesse James and the treasure, along with Freemasons and to the Templars, Rosicrucians, and the Founding Fathers, through secret diaries left behind by Jesse James. How are they all connected? We'll find out today. This is Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet with Captain Ron, and today we welcome to Truth Be Told, Daniel Duke. Daniel, welcome to Truth Be Told.
Thanks.
We're excited to have you on the show. This is one of the type of topics that I love to discuss: history and controversy and lost treasures. I mean, what more can you expect? I mean, this is good stuff.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm going to start right in. You wrote a book, and it's called Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure: Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and the Knights of the Golden Circle. So let's go dive right in. I want to find out, you said Jesse James, your great-great-grandfather, left behind a secret, not just diary, but diaries. And I was wanting to find out, where did you find out about these diaries? Who found them? Where were they discovered at?
They were passed down through the family. He kept the diaries. The one we have is dated from 1871 till 1876, and there's several others in the family. But some of the family members get real protective over it and won't even let other family members see it. So it's kind of that's been an ongoing struggle to get my hands on one of those.
So, I mean, why are they so protective of it? Is it because is it just because who he was, or there's information in there that leads to bigger things?
I think some of them worry. Well, there's probably treasure legends in the other, or symbols in the other diaries as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that it has to do with that. And then there's, I guess, other reasons. Some of the people, one of the guys I know has at least one. His mother, she was my grandfather's sister, so she'd be my great aunt. She when my grandfather passed away a year before I was born, she didn't go to the funeral. She went to the house and took the trunk that he had full of family objects. So, and she got a lot of the diaries that way and photos. And now he has them, and I think he's worried someone's going to do the same thing his mother did. So I probably shouldn't have said that.
Right. Bleep. We'll edit that out. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
No, it is funny how, especially that generation, my grandmother and I didn't know my great grandparents, but my grandparents, they were very secretive about certain things in family history of just internal family secrets. I couldn't even imagine, having Jesse James as your great grandfather and trying to keep secrets. So I'm excited to talk about this, because when you said in some of these diaries there are symbols and there's coded maps. Is that correct?
That's right.
Did you get to see these yourself?
Yeah. He's got codes. The codes weren't hard to break. They're just he substituted numbers for letters, and he would mix them in different ways, but as long as he had a couple of letters in the word, it made it fairly easy to decipher that. So, but some of the symbols, it's kind of up in the air as to what they mean. Heart-shaped symbols are supposed to be a symbol of treasures, and then there's other symbols he's got throughout his diary that I've yet to decipher. So.
Well, now these diaries, when were they written? Were they supposedly before he was killed or died, or was this after? Because I know we're going to talk about in a little bit about faking his death. Mm-hmm. Do you know exactly when these were written?
Yeah, well, like the diary we have is dated from 1871 to 1876, and in the diary he mentions known gang members. Known James gang members like Tom McDaniels,
right,
and other people. Then he also mentions a trip they went on to Louisiana. Everywhere he detailed going on that trip, there were robberies attributed to the James gang that coincided with that trip. And everywhere he was, there were robberies in the same areas he was in. Even the same steamship they took was robbed. So, and it was in the papers of that day, and it coincided perfectly with the time and place he was there.
Well, one thing we have in common, my great uncle, he was actually part of a bank robbing gang.
Wow.
Yeah, he actually spent time in prison. I didn't know this for years and years. They used to call him Uncle Skinny. And
Skinny.
Yeah, Uncle Skinny. He was the of course they had cars at the time. I think it was the 1920s, but he was the getaway car driver. So, well, it's funny. Like I said, there's always secrets in families. But what do you think of Jesse James is the biggest secret? Because we've seen hundreds of TV shows and movies, and we've heard of other books out there about Jesse James. And even the one with what was his name, Emilio Estevez, who?
That was with Billy the Kid.
Billy the Kid. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So, but even then, it was like they portrayed him at the end of the movie like faking his death.
Yeah.
So
I don't think it was too uncommon in those days.
Is it? But do you think he faked his death again to protect, the truth of the treasure, or do you think that he actually faked his death just to get away from the law?
I think it was his main reason was to get away from the law. Eventually it was going to catch up to him, and he had beaten the odds so many times. I don't think he had
too much
his luck probably would have run out eventually.
Right. So when he faked his death, or is this for sure, or is this more speculation?
We're positive. There's detractors, of course, and most of the small group of detractors that we've had, they're very vocal but small. They all surround. They're all connected in one way or another to the James Farman Museum in Missouri. Mm-hmm. And as you know, it started out with they were mocking my mother, mocking us, and after the second book came out, my mother's second book. The death threat started. The FBI got involved and fortunately put a stop to that. And after that, it started. She wrote a third book, and a few years after that, when my mother passed away, and that's when we picked up. My sister and I picked up where my mother left off, and have been continuing the story. While my mother focused mostly on Jesse, I got interested in the treasure side of it, and that's where this first book came from. Mostly just trying to find his treasures, and then I stumbled upon something much bigger than what I had anticipated.
Well, I mean, did you get involved with the Jesse James because of your mother, or were you actually working on your own book before she passed away, or did you just pick up where she left off?
I got involved because of my mother, and I was never going to write about the treasure side of the story. After I'd finally discovered all this, I thought, wow, it was too. It reminds me of the Da Vinci Code meets the movie National Treasure in a way.
That's what I thought
just
about
because
earlier.
The treasures are spread out all over the place, and it involves more than Jesse. It was a lot of people over centuries putting these treasures together, amassing the treasures and then hiding them. And I wasn't going to say a word about it. And then after my mother passed away, I thought, why not? Why not just put it out there? When she passed away, it kind of woke me up. You don't live forever. Right. You kind of get to where you don't even, most people don't live day to day thinking of death. And I was certainly that way. And then after that happened, I thought, why not? I'm just going to put it out there, write about it. And my second book is all about Jesse, but the first book was a little about Jesse and mostly about the treasures.
Well, have you found any of these treasures?
I've found where they were. That
was key.
Yes, were. Some were. The ones I've found were recovered already. Right. I do know I believe there's hundreds out there still. Some of the large ones, the ones that I found that were recovered, several of those I was shown. Former Texas Attorney
Really?
General Wagner Carr had sent his driver out to show. His driver showed my mother and I where several of the locations were, and those were large treasures worth today probably at pushing $1 billion somewhere
Holy
in that
crap.
area. Those were huge. It took, well, the first one the Texas Rangers confiscated. They got that. Well, the guy who was selling it was doing it illegally, and they basically they protected the treasure. I don't know any details other than that. Then on the other one that was recovered that the driver showed us, it was also a large treasure, and we don't have any details on who got it or where it went.
I was going to ask you because we hear all the time, these ships out in the middle of the ocean, they discover they have, tons of gold on it, and we hear about it. It's in the news. Why are we not hearing about this in the news?
I guess people didn't want it known. Whoever they kept it quiet. The one of the treasures that we were shown where it was,
right.
It was 12 miles from where I live, just east of me, not right outside of Georgetown, Texas. And this was back in '89, sometime in the '80s when that one was recovered. It was
that's funny. And so are these mostly, okay, first of all, was Jesse James a Freemason or was he part of the Knights Templar? Because they're very similar. I mean, I know they're pretty much one and the same, but there are some differences.
He was a Freemason, I know for a fact. I believe he probably, it wouldn't shock me if he was a Templar. I would think he was, because that seems to be the common denominator in this whole story. It ties back to the Knights Templar. So he was I would imagine a Masonic Templar, but in the Templar are a part of Freemasonry,
right.
So it's kind of one and the same. As far as I know.
Yeah, I my grandfather, he was part of the Oddfellows, and the Rebeccas. My grandma was a Rebecca, so they're very similar also.
Yeah.
And some of my ancestors were Freemasons. I don't know much about it, and have never been a part of it, but it's always fascinating. I mean, have you ever spoke with any Freemasons about Jesse James?
Quite well, yeah. Over the years, when we first came out with the story, when my mother's first book came out, it seemed like we suddenly started meeting a lot of Freemasons, and it wasn't anything bad or scary. It was
Right.
they were nice guys, and as the years have gone on and all the research we've done, it just keeps getting me more and more interested in Freemasonry and the Templar and everybody. Like in my book, it goes back a lot further than I thought it did. And after writing the book, I've decided I personally think some of the Freemasons, like Francis Bacon, who was considered the modern, or the founder of modern day Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, I always look at him almost as a founding father.
Well, let me ask you this. And you said in the book itself, it says you explain Jesse James used techniques involving sacred geometry and symbols to hide his treasures and coded maps. When you said hide his treasure, was part of the people to actually bury the treasure, or was this other? Because did he steal this treasure, or was he just part of the Templar and the Freemasons that hid it?
I think he did both. Some of the treasures that he buried, he had stole. He and his gang, and I don't know who they were stealing it from. A lot of these treasures they were getting, they didn't they didn't make a lot of money off robbing passengers. They certainly robbed some passengers, and that's well documented. But I think their main target was on trains and even stages. Could have been information and gold and other items. I think they had. If you read about the robberies, every train they hit had what they were after. They didn't hit trains that had nothing on it. So they
inside job.
Yeah, they had intel. They had intel they hit the target and they left. And I used to wonder, if they got all that gold, how did they get away from all the posses, all that gold weighing them down? And I think the template that I discovered is a logical reason or logical means of getting rid. They knew, they had the template. It's a veil, like a grid system that covers the Americas. So anywhere they were robbing a bank, train, or stage,
right,
they only had to ride a few miles to a spot that would be located on the grid template or the veil template, and they could just drop it off there, or drop it off with someone in the area who oversaw that area, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And was it easy to read?
Yeah, it's easy to once you see it, once you know it, know how to find it. It's real easy to figure out.
I mean, it's so fascinating to think. Most of us, again, we've seen the TV shows, like you said, National Treasure, and the fantasy of it, and you're actually getting to live that fantasy for so many people that would love to find a hidden map or hidden treasure, or find out information about ancestor that was part of something so big. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
It's been like, sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming. It's a wild story, and it's all true, and it's verifiable. I mean, you can't dig up a lot of facts on the secret society part of it, or anything that was supposed to be secret that they kept secret. That's kind of hard to find, but there's information if you know what you're looking for, and it took me 20 years to figure it out. So, that took a long time. By the time you figure it out, you're too old to go look for half of them. So
you're like, oh, my back hurts, I think
send a kid out there.
Right. So. Now, was it easy to understand some of the symbols? If you're not, especially like the Knights Templar and Freemasons, they have a lot of symbols. Did you have to do a lot of research, or was it pretty easy to read?
I did a lot of research. I started out, when I found out, we call him Grandpa. Jesse was a Freemason under his alias James Lafayette Courtney, and I started reading as much as I could on Freemasonry. Manly Palmer Hall, Albert Pike's books, and Albert Pike mentioned a lot. He mentioned Kabbalah, like in his book Morals and Dogma. He mentioned Kabbalah throughout the book, and really? Gematria, and also the Tree of Life. And I didn't know anything about that stuff. So I started reading more, and just reading about those topics kind of draws you into it just because they're fascinating on their own. And as I kept reading and reading, it just drew me closer. It's almost like I stumbled onto it, and it just kind of led me down the path. And there's a lot of rabbit holes you can get lost in off the side.
I'm sure.
It got real, just trying to make sure I wasn't going down the wrong rabbit hole. And sometimes you would, and then you're thinking, this sounds crazy. And you back up, backtrack, go hit the other, path. And finally I felt like I was stumbling onto this the whole time. But then when it started, I got on Google Earth, started drawing out the maps the way I discovered them. And it all started, everything lines up. It lines up with the Kensington runestone that Scott Wolter had done so much work with, and his hooked X.
He's one of my favorite guests, I have to say. I love him. He's such a great guy.
He's a great guy. And his discoveries are huge. And his hooked X that he discovered, I found that on one of the books that I had stumbled onto from 1516. It was a book by Paolo Riccio titled Gates of Light, and it dealt with the Kabbalah. That was like another, oh my God, there's a hooked X right on the cover of this. And then it went from that into just so many other topics. But I traced it back like a family tree, almost like doing genealogy, right? But only with an organization, from Albert Pike through the founding fathers to Francis Bacon. I thought Francis Bacon was the guy who started it all, and then I was satisfied for a few days, and then I discovered that he wasn't. He had a mentor named John Dee, who was an amazing man. That he was considered the original 007. He was an alchemist. He was a genius in his own right. And it went from him back through alchemists, Jewish rabbis, back to a rabbi named a famous rabbi called Rashi, and he was a favored court guest of the Knight Templar, Hugh the Count of Champagne, who was one of the founders of the Knights Templar. And it just, it's a lot of names, a lot of people. John Heropoulos, Johann Reuchlin, figures from the Renaissance time, back through Leonardo da Vinci, and just there's a lot of names, big names, well known, and there's also a lot of names that I'd never heard in my life until I stumbled on those.
Right.
Yeah, it was quite a trip.
No, like I said, I always think it's important to do your research of your family history, and my mother, who never knew her real mother, she passed away before she really knew her. When we found out who she was, we found the whole different side of the family. And my seventh great grandfather was Richard Stockton, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, who was a Mason.
Yeah.
So I mean, when you mention these founding fathers, it's fascinating, and it intrigues me to know about their life and what they did and how they created this country, and there has to be a lot of secrets out there. I mean, come on. I mean, to even just speculate the amount of secrets, it would just blow all over mine. So, well, and same thing is you found out Jesse James is your great grandfather, but you didn't know that for a long time.
Well, I knew about I grew up
rumors.
hearing Jesse James.
Yeah,
but I didn't. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say how was that verified? Did grandparents or great grandparents or who verified that?
Well, it was family lore, and that's when when you grow up hearing that at every holiday, anytime the family got together, you'd hear all these stories. And my mom finally, she decided she wanted to find out, what was true, our family story or the historical account. So the movies, all the movies show him getting shot in the back of the head by Bob Ford. And we wanted to know who was right. And she started digging up, we got our photographs, and we would look at them, the family photos of Jesse. He lived under the alias of James Lafayette Courtney. We would compare his photos to historically accepted photos, and we had his mother, his and other family members, and it wasn't just my great grandfather whose pictures looked just like Jesse James. His mom was. They looked alike. They were missing the same arm, and they even wore the same dress. When you compared his mother's photos to the historically accepted Jesse's mom, the photos of Jesse's mother that are historically accepted. Same woman, same missing arm, same dress. And I mean, even the same print on the dress. It was all identical. The guy they said was his father. Then there's Jesse's stepfather. They both had the same hand that was deformed, or it got maimed when the Pinkertons threw the bomb in the James family's house.
Right.
It blew his mother's arm off. It maimed his stepfather's hand and killed his 9-year-old brother. And that's how he got his hand maimed, and it looked kind of like it didn't look too good. But anyway, we thought, okay, these look alike. So we took them to experts. My mother took them to Austin Police Department forensic photographic lab, the Texas Department of Public Safety, which is our state police, and a group called Visionics, who were at the time facial recognition, world leaders in facial recognition technology. And they got bought out by somebody else. But 3 different experts all verified that our photos matched. And Mom thought, hey, I'll call the James farm. They're going to be happy to hear that he didn't die. They didn't want to hear that. That was the last thing they wanted to hear. And that's when all the trouble with that started. But so she went back to the drawing table, and we kept researching, getting more information, and it led to 3 books from her. And now the treasure side of it I wrote about, and I just finished a second book, which is all about just continuing my mother's research on Jesse.
Nice. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And I'm glad you're continuing the research and the books, because I think it's important that, and this is American history. This is something that's a big part of the Wild West, and how how he changed. I mean, look, Hollywood has taken him
Yeah,
and embraced him many times. So,
that's true.
so I want to get back to the treasure a little bit, because most people, they would love to find this treasure. They would love to find any of the hundreds. It sounds like hundreds of different locations. So
Yeah.
you said many of them have been found, but I'm curious and see if your curiosity is when some of these treasures have been found. It sounds like they've been mostly farmers, maybe locals, that maybe have just kind of came across these treasures.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of give us in the audience of how were they discovered? Were they buried in like a tomb? Were they buried just under the dirt? Were they buried in caves? How were they discovered, and how were they found? I guess.
It varies. Like the one that was 12 miles from me, it was in a cave. It was a natural cave that happened to be. It fell on the right spot on the grid pattern, the veil template, and they put it in the cave. That's all the details I know on that one. I don't know. I know there was a lot of gold in it. She said it took several. She said Wagner car's driver told us they were taking the gold, loading it into 18-wheelers or tractor trailer rigs, and it was several tractor trailer rigs, and they've made return trips and got more.
Wow.
And that's all she told us about that. The other one was a hole in the ground, but there was a railroad spur that went off the main railroad track and ended right where they buried it. And that she claimed, and Wagner Carr claimed, that the railroad spur was built there for that purpose. So, and trains would use it to back up and other stuff just outside of town. But it was a small town that one was near. But she said the spur was built for the purpose of burying the treasure and then recovering it later. So I don't. All I know is there was a big hole in the ground, and it's used as a stock tank now.
All right. So tell us the Knights Templar treasure. What can you explain a little bit more about what that is? Because we know Jesse James, stole, treasure or money or gold or whatever, and then buried it. But the Knights Templar goes back way farther than Jesse James.
Yeah, and that was another thing. I thought, okay, this grid pattern, this veil template, it lines up with historic sites around the country, the Newport Tower, the Kensington Runestone, the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone, and other sites. I thought, Jesse couldn't have done that, and that predates him.
Right. Exactly.
So by a long shot. So, it had to involve other people, and there's no way one man could cover the entire country and keep an eye on all that. So, it definitely had to take a group to do this over centuries. And that means it wasn't just a group, it was a very dedicated group. And the Freemasons and people who came before them, they fit that bill perfectly. And on top of that, I traced it back to them, showing that it was them. They were the ones who did this. Now I'm starting to forget your question.
No, I was just saying, what exactly is the Knights Templar treasure?
Oh yeah, they a lot of the treasures were amassed throughout history. I think but the main treasure, I believe, if you're familiar with Holy Blood, Holy Grail,
right,
and stories like the Da Vinci Code, which was the fictional version that kind of shot off of that, but I think it was the treasures from the temple in Jerusalem, and not just that. According to Timothy Hogan, who's the current Grand Master of the Knight Templar, he has mentioned on you can see it on YouTube, his interviews. He has mentioned that the treasures come from not just the Temple of Jerusalem, but other items of historic and religious significance that come from other beliefs and cultures, like the Druze and the Sufis and other traditions in the Middle East. So he said the Templar weren't part of the Crusaders. They went in knowing that the Crusades were coming. There was no way to stop it.
Right.
So they went in and basically safeguarded everything. They got what they could, safeguarded it to preserve it and hid it. So basically, I believe they hid it from the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I've interviewed several Freemasons, and they had talked about the Knights Templar, how it was a lot from the Catholic Church, and it
Yep.
wasn't. They were actually protecting it for the Catholic Church, and then the Catholic Church apparently turned on the Knights Templar.
That's how I understood
Yeah.
it. They turned on them, and I think they knew what was coming before that day in Friday the 13th, or
Right.
in 1307 on when they were raided. I think they knew what was coming, and they had everything out of there before it actually happened. So,
All
and I
right.
also think, well, like the ships, there's stories they had a fleet of ships in the harbor, and then the next morning they were all gone.
Right.
So they took off, and I think from there they went to Scotland. I think from Scotland they probably regrouped, and I think from Scotland they headed to the New World, Nova Scotia, and along the eastern coast.
And I mean, what's fascinating, if they did bring this treasure to America, and they did, the Knights Templar or the Freemasons have buried this, or, I mean, what's funny is the National Treasure, the movies itself, it seems kind of far-fetched, but I'm not quite sure that it is as far-fetched as people might think.
I don't think it's far fetched at all. Maybe I don't know. I would love to find a room like the one they
Right.
had, the treasure hoard.
Right.
That'd be amazing. But I don't know. Maybe that's far fetched. But at the same time, I don't discount anything anymore. When I went into this, I I expected at most to find maybe a quart jar of silver coins, and or maybe a couple of gold coins if I was really lucky. And I ended up stumbling across this, and it just at first you're left walking around wondering if you've gone insane. It's like, what happened to me?
Right.
And then you keep trying to verify this stuff, and everything keeps matching up. And I would hit it from every angle I could think of, and it all leads back to the same answers. So I know that feeling of being bewildered and wondering, could this be true? It seems way too far fetched, but I don't think it's far fetched at all now.
Well, listen, I think there's treasures always in front of our eyes. Like you said, 12 miles from where you grew up. And one example is I had a cousin that years ago in Kansas, that's where I'm from, where he had purchased an old house and he was just going to tear it down. He bought the land and going to tear it down. And not thinking much of it. I mean, we used to do this all the time, and we used to find some coins, not gold coins, but coins or whatever from the 1920s and maybe 1910s.
Yeah.
But my cousin tore down this house, and inside the wall was perfectly preserved 3 baseball cards from the night.
Wow.
One of the first baseball cards ever made, and those were worth a fortune.
That's a treasure right there.
So, I mean, if you think about it, so many things that are right in front of your eyes, inside a wall, inside, in a well, in a cave. I mean, there's so many things out there, and so many hundreds of years of people traveling around this country, placing things, along the way, or, in a wagon that happened to get destroyed and buried. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't know, and I would love to be a part of an expedition that gets to go and find one of these. But like you said, they're so secretive now, and not even revealing when something is found. I know the South was big on the hiding the treasure, the big treasure. So this I'm sure this is part of that treasure.
Yeah, I'm still curious about some of that, like the Knights of the Golden Circle.
Yes,
they were
a
southern group. They were kind of like spies and saboteurs for the South. But after the Civil War, their goal was alleged to gain as much wealth as they could any way they could to refund a second Civil War.
Right.
And I can see, I thought, well, that's just like any football game. If you lose against your rival, you always want a second shot. But I don't think they played as big a role in this as I had originally thought.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't think the Knights of the Golden Circle played much of a role in it. They may have, and I kind of wonder if some of the treasures that they did store up weren't taken or found in some way and taken from them and buried in another spot or used for some other purpose. It wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah,
And that's my theory. I can't prove that, but that's just my theory on it.
well, what do you think about this where they say, do you believe that there's might be a connection with Jesse James, the Knights Templar, the treasure, and Oak Island?
I think there is a connection.
Really?
I definitely do. Yeah, the template that I've written about in my book, there's two templates: the veil template and one in the shape of the tree of life. And that just blows my mind. Just not only because the shape of it, it deals with Kabbalah. It ties in with God just so much. It's all these Kabbalah, ancient myths.
Right.
The movement, or like the procession of the equinoxes, the sun, numbers that tie in with the sun, Venus, male and female, all this symbolism wrapped up into one template, and it's mind blowing. And there's probably more that's yet to be discovered that I haven't even stumbled on yet. But it ties in with all this stuff. Jesse was just a small part. He was a big player, he's a big historic name in Old West history, but he was a small player in the scheme of all this. I mean, he was just one small part. And there were a lot of other people, probably a lot of people who have done just as many amazing things as he did, who may never be known.
And why do you think, and I'm going to get back to the Oak Island real quick, but why do you think Jesse James, really, his name has lived for so long?
I think it's a typical, like a Robin Hood story. He was known as America's Robin Hood. He was popular by a lot of people in his day. He had good PR. There was one of the news reporters, John Newman Edwards, who was he was a big fan of the James gang. He was a great PR machine for them. And then when the Pinkertons threw the bomb in the house and blew up, killed his brother, hurt his mother, just that horrible tragedy, that just put a lot of public favor on the James gang side. So you've got that, and in the story of him getting shot in the back of the head, it's like it's a perfect story. You couldn't write a better story than that. And it just, everything seemed geared for public sentiment. Getting shot in the back of the head by one of your own gang members, it's like the ultimate betrayal. And I think that pulled at a lot of people's heartstrings, and just kind of all the sentiment fell towards him, and it turned him into a tragic hero.
Yeah. And like I said, to this day, as you know, everybody knows Jesse James. And around the office today, I've been singing Cher's song with Jesse. I'm like, I can't get that damn song out of my head.
I wish you wouldn't have mentioned it, because now I'm going to have it in my head.
Hey, if I have to do this, you're going to have to share it with me. I was thinking about with the Oak Island. The thing is, I've had people on talking about Oak Island, and they've found a lot of things, but how is it? I mean, that's so far away, and how would that even back then? I mean, it's not like we have a jet plane flying up there. That's a long travel.
Yeah, it is, and I think it took centuries. Like the Kensington Runestone.
Right.
I'm not sure which came first. I believe the Kensington Runestone came before Oak Island, but they may have already had Oak Island marked as a spot. I think they had their maps drawn out. A lot of Freemasons and people before them were involved in, they were good surveyors. They were involved in all the ancient arts.
Right.
And they knew what they were doing. They were intelligent people. I don't think it was hard. I think it just took a long time for them to get that. Right. They even, like, some of this map lines up with paintings from Poussin, Nicholas Poussin, in Arcadia Ego. That's a famous painting that ties in with Holy Blood, Holy Grail. I don't think it points to the treasure being there. I do think there are treasures in France, but that are connected. But I think that whole painting is telling a story to those who knew that the treasures were here in America, using Cassini's celestial globe of 1792, wow. The constellation Lyra and other constellations, they tie in perfectly with that map. And
do they really?
Yeah, it's amazing to me. But I don't think it was hard. I just think it took a while. And you also have to remember, there were Freemasons and people in those, I guess, allied societies, people of like minds in every nation in Europe, and all these nations that were coming over here vying for, to get their piece of the new world, the Spaniards, the French,
Right.
the English. There were people in those same groups in each country, and I think they all, I believe they communicated this to each other. I don't think it's kind of puts you in a hard position. That's more theory, but I believe it. Seeing it that way, it makes it easy to see how they could have coordinated all this and buried these treasures in all these different areas over time.
And do you think the treasures that are being discovered that we don't know about, because it sounds like they keep it pretty hush hush, where do you think these treasures are going? What do you?
I don't know. I don't know. I believe a large portion of the treasures were used to found America. All these groups, the Masons, alchemists, Rosicrucians,
right.
Anybody who didn't, and Jewish people, anybody who didn't think the way the powers that the power at that time, the Catholic Church,
right.
If you disagreed with what they said, you could lose your head. They all had a common goal. They wanted a land where they could, have freedom and liberty. And if you read like Francis Bacon's book, The New Atlantis, it's basically a blueprint for what America was to be. And I believe they used a lot of those treasures to fund the Revolutionary War and to keep America on the right track throughout history. I believe that much. Now, as to like the remaining treasures, where I don't know what they're going to be used for or what they're being used for. I would imagine it would stick along with the same goal they originally had.
Right. Well, do you know on the maps or on the coded maps, or the maps, or even Jesse James, or even just hearsay of how far stretched is some of these treasures that have been discovered, mostly in the South, or is it all over America?
They're all over. They're in Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and
really?
I believe South America, portions of South America.
That's fascinating.
It is. It's wild. I haven't drawn the map all the way down to South America. If you get on Google Earth and try to draw a map that large, as detailed as this gets,
right.
The lines eventually. Google Earth isn't a good program. It's a great program. I love using it. It's the only tool I have on a lot of this, but for drawing the maps out. But when you get too far away from like the center of America and you're going towards the East Coast, lines that are supposed to be 80.5 miles apart end up getting a lot closer than they should be. They're like 78 miles apart. So it kind of throws it off. But and that gets frustrating. You have to work a lot harder just to try to keep everything as accurate as possible. But I haven't covered the entire U.S. I've covered a large part of that and parts of Canada and Mexico, and it lines up with these historically known sites and sites where known treasures have been recovered.
Right.
But I wish I had a program that could accurately draw the veil over everything all at once. So, we always want what we, things
right,
like that.
Right. Have you talked to Scott Walter about this particular subject?
I've spoken to him once on the phone and a couple of times on email. Real nice guy. He was busy. I was busy at the time, but it was nice I was happy to speak to him.
Oh my gosh, yeah. He's so fascinating. I mean, and you can tell he loves what he does. That's what I love about him. He's not just one just to, for exposure. Like it's like you can tell you really have a passion about Jesse James and the treasure. I mean, because we all, this is our fantasy is to be a part of something like this. So, well, I mean, we're out of time, but listen, you'd have to come back, and if you have any new books you're putting together, or
right now we've got my sister and I. She co-authored the book with me. It's Jesse,
Great.
The Mysterious Life. I don't even have the title yet, but we're going through the editing stage. I've posted it online. Let me. 1 second. I can tell you the title real quick.
Perfect.
Let me see. Got to put on my.
I was going to say,
glasses.
I see you squinting, so you might want to put your glasses.
Yeah. Let's see. I've got so much artwork on my desk right now. Oh, here it is. Sorry, I didn't mean to take up too much time. It's The Mysterious Life and Faked Death of Jesse James. And that's the second book. It'll be coming out in June of 2020.
Well, you're going to have to come back and tell us all about it. I mean, this is fascinating stuff, and such a pleasure to speak with you. And
Thanks.
Can you tell people, are you going to be speaking anywhere, talking about other shows you're going to be on that you can promote so they can check you out?
There's some things I can't speak about right now, but yeah, I'm always, if anybody has questions, you can go to my website. It's authordanduke.com. Just fill out the form and I'll do what I can to answer your questions. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well. So you can type in Dan Duke author and find me on Twitter and Facebook easily.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much. And please, now you're a part of Truth Be Told family. I know people that always find this stuff fascinating. And please come back again. And also, please subscribe to our channel. Share this episode with your friends. Leave a nice review. Never, if you don't have something nice to say, like Mama says, don't say it at all. but please give us a review. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. For Tony Sweet, Captain Ron, and Dan Duke here with the history of Jesse James and the Knights Templar treasure. This is Truth Be Told. Until next time, take care of yourselves.
Thanks a lot.